Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed Live. We are super excited to have you join us on the show today. We hope you all had a nice July 4th, wherever you are and from wherever you're streaming in from, be it LearnTV, Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube. I want to remind you all to ask questions from wherever you're streaming in from. We are looking at those questions, and we might even be able to answer some of those questions live. So yeah, just head over to LearnTV to ask questions and engage with us. It always makes it a little more fun, kind of breaks up the, well, we actually have a lot of speakers today, so it's going to be a really exciting episode. So I think you guys are all going to like learning about what's new across the Azure Data Suite. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. I wanted to start with some brief product updates, as always. And the first big update that I wanted to share with you all is about Azure Arc. Now, recently, actually just last week, there was this big Azure Hybrid Cloud event. And during that event, we announced the general availability and the upcoming general availability of Azure Arc and a few related services inside that. So I just wanted to share briefly, some of you have probably been hearing about Azure Arc enabled data services like Azure Arc enabled SQL managed instance or Azure Arc enabled SQL Server. So those are some cool things to check out. I know there are also some Postgres hyperscale options as well as services to support your applications. Specifically, I just pulled this slide from that Azure Hybrid Cloud event so you can see what exactly was announced. A few things here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but a short reminder that everything you hear about today will be posted on the news update blog, which should have just gone live. So be sure to check out that news update blog. It's at aka.ms/news update. That being said, we can continue on and talk about the other big announcement I wanted to talk about is Azure Active Directory only authentication. Now, this is specific to Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. And for y'all that are familiar with these two services, you might recall that when you go and deploy an Azure SQL Database logical server or an Azure SQL Managed Instance, you have to deploy with a SQL account. But afterwards, you can add Azure Active Directory accounts and Azure Active Directory admin, that sort of thing. So in this preview, there are two important things that we've done. We've added this option for you to only allow people to log in using Azure Active Directory. But on top of that, later in the preview, what we added is that you can actually go and create an Azure SQL Database logical server or Azure SQL Managed Instance without having that SQL admin to deploy initially. So that's another new change. So something to check out, something we've been hearing a lot from customers. So hopefully if it's relevant for your organization to move towards AAD only, this is one step closer to that. Now, the other exciting, really exciting announcement is Azure SQL Hyperscale. And I just wanted to show, I'll link to this in the blog, but I just wanted to show a brief video so you guys can see kind of what it's all about. And then I have a cool surprise.
Okay, so how else then have you configured your hyperscale implementation?
Secondary replicas, not just read-only replicas, but named replicas have been game-changing for us. This allowed us to keep our primary instance for our compute-intensive ETL and data processing. We can then assign name replicas for specific purposes like analytics and reporting. These tap into a copy of the same data, but have their own dedicated compute. If you recall, when I showed you the slider screen, we had a secondary replica configured for customer traffic, which is part of a scalable pool of replicas for load balancing. If I switch tabs, you can see that we also have a named replica configured to handle analytics traffic. Routing traffic to these replicas is as simple as changing the connection string. This means that critical customer workloads are not interrupted by our compute-intensive analytic operations.
So with such massive amounts of
All right, that video didn't play as exactly well as I was hoping it would, but hopefully you all get the gist of it and my special surprise
of data that are coming in.
Oh, let's stop the video.
Okay, so
again, first time playing a video in a live stream. We'll work on that. But something exciting is that I'm actually going to bring in a special guest today, the PM leading this feature, Davide Mauri. Davide, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And Before you get into telling us about this cool new feature and why people might want to use it, I'd love to just, if you could give our viewers like a brief overview of what you do on the Azure SQL team.
Yeah, sure. I'm a PM in the Azure SQL team, and as a PM, we try to understand what the customer needs and want, what features we can add to the product, and then make it happen, right? And so, especially this feature is basically one of the feature that came out from request from customers to have a much better scalability story.
Awesome, cool. So Azure SQL Hyperscale named replicas.
Yeah.
Tell us all about it.
Oh, yeah. And as you may guess, I have some slides ready. So here we go. So what are named replicas? Well, let's start from the easy part. Named replicas are, as the name implies, a replica. And probably people are already used to replicas because they have the geo replicas. They also have what we now call high availability replicas, which are basically logical copy or sometimes also physical copy of the data. And we have these copies are usually read-only. Now, the named replicas are different from the usual replicas we had in Hyperscale because the replicas we had before were super amazing because we don't have to move data around to create a replica thanks to hyperscale architecture. So we can just basically create a sort of a logical replica. But the one of the issue that customer was telling us that we should have improved is that those replica wouldn't show in the portal. And instead now with named replicas, you have a regular, in quote, database that is visible in the portal, with the exception that is actually a replica of another database. So you have all the comfort of managing this replica like a regular database, but is actually a replica, not a standalone database. And with that, basically, you can just create a replica in the same server, in another server. But since we are not really copying data around, and that's why named replicas are so beautiful, we are just basically spinning up a new compute node and connecting the compute node to the existing page server. The hyperscale architecture allows us to do that because we have everything as a set of distributed services. Well, the only limitation of named replicas is that they must be in the same region because that's the trick we use to avoid to copy data around. If someone needs to have a physical copy in another region, for example, for disaster recovery purposes, of course, then they can use the GeoDR. But with named replicas, we are covering all the possible scenario. And also named replicas, and this is what the video was showing, with named replicas, you can have any of the named replicas you have with its own service level objective. So maybe you have your primary as only 4 cores, which is more than enough for the workload you need to sustain. But for reporting purposes, you need to have 20 cores. And with that, you can just use named replicas, set it to 20 core. Again, it will be created without copying data, so it will be just a matter of seconds, and then you can run your reports, turn off, actually destroy the named replicas, and you're good. So very nice for reporting and HTAP workload. Also, for security reasons, some customers asked us to create named replicas because they wanted to create a replica, so a kind of a logical copy of data that can be accessed only by a specific principal, and that principal shouldn't be able to access the primary. So you can completely isolate the access to your database and give it, for example, to a data scientist of another company so that they can do whatever they want, but they don't have any other access to the primary, so you are sure that they are only working on the copy of the data. And of course, another very cool stuff here is that all named replicas benefit from the Azure Hybrid benefit. So the cost of a named replica is somehow 30% lower than the primary. So if you have a massive OLTP solution and you architect your application carefully, you can take advantage of scaling out and thus saving money instead of scaling up. So instead of maybe moving from a 20 vCore to an 80 vCore, you can create 4 additional 20 vCore, but those 20 vCore being named replicas, we just basically you will just have the benefit of the Azure Hybrid benefit, which means, again, same performance, but with less price. So, it's a win-win. And I guess that's it. The only thing I want to highlight is that we also have created now a portal experience. before. We just released the named replicas in public preview, so now they are like GA ready. Of course, are still in preview. So if customer find any issue, it will be great for us to have the feedback so that we can improve the product. But in general, the feeling is like a GA product because you have the portal and you can create an named replica for the portal, manage from the portal, or use PowerShell, AZCLI, or even a REST API to automate everything. So it's really a complete feature set. And with that, I'm good. I just want to remember that we will also have a dedicated data exposed session on named replicas, right?
Yes, yeah, we have a session coming up soon, so definitely stay tuned for that deep dive of that episode. One question, Davide, just to kind of round out how cool named replicas are. Like you said, there's no real data movement, so you can kind of spin these up and delete them very quickly.
Yes.
So does that mean that I could say like, oh, I'm going to run this big workload and I just like scale up on the fly and then scale down on the fly?
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. You can just instead of scaling up, which is something that people are using right now, scaling up and down very quickly. Now you can also scale out. So, for example, if you have a massive amount of mobile clients, for example, connecting to your API, and instead of scaling up, you prefer to scale out because also you need more connection capabilities, and in general you can have up to 30 named replicas. So if you do the math, 80 vCore for 30 named replicas, you can have more than 2,000 vCore just serving your database. So you can really sustain a huge amount of workload. So yeah, looking forward to customer taking advantage of this.
Cool, awesome. And for everyone wanting to learn more, you can check the news blog because we put a lot of references so you can learn more about the customer story you saw a snippet of, as well as some of the innovations that Davide and team have been working on. So be sure to check that out. And Davide, thanks again so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so that's really cool. Named replicas really cool, changing the game. 2,000 vCores is a lot of cores, but I know some of our customers need that much compute, so it's cool that we're able to give it to them now. So next we have another special guest coming on, and this guest, Mitch Van Hoeksloot, is going to be talking to us about this new IP asset. So I'm going to bring Mitch on. Hey, Mitch, how's it going?
Hi there. Great. I'm glad to be here today. So I just want to give you a bit of background. So my team is a group of worldwide architects that are part of the SQL engineering organization. And basically what we do is we unblock customers that are looking to modernize or migrate their data to Azure SQL. So often as part of that activity of migrating, we end up developing some workarounds to help unblock that. And so this particular tool is one of those that we've developed. So originally this tool I developed in SSIS, so SQL Server Integration Services, and basically it did a table at a time in the database, and we did it for one of the banks that was willing. They absolutely needed to make sure that all the data got across, but basically what they were willing to take the hit in terms of the amount of time it took at table at a time to actually make sure the data was across. But basically, because it didn't scale, we ended up redeveloping it as a C# multi-threaded application. So anyway, so in terms of the actual tool, the sources that it will support are Oracle, DB2, MySQL, Postgres, Teradata, and Netezza. It'll target pretty much anything SQL. So whether it's Synapse or whether it's any of the SQL, whether it's on premises or in a VM, or one of our PaaS services like DB, MI, or Hyperscale. And in terms of the actual application, it's a console application. It doesn't have pretty UI, unfortunately. But it does use some colors in the, unfortunately for the colorblind in the audience, that's, yeah, I use red and green, which is unfortunate. But anyway, you can see the errors, like it gives you error counts and such in the console window. So in terms of inputs, there's the application config. So most of the stuff is done in the application config. So it's pretty straightforward. And really all you have to do is set the source and the target databases, and tell me what type they are, and then the rest you just run the actual executable. So in terms of outputs, there's the console output, and then if there are any mismatches between the tables, it will create a text file for each one of the mismatches, or for each one of the tables that have mismatches. And there is also an optional spreadsheet output report. So basically the way that it works is it does an MD5 hash across all of the rows or all the columns in all of the rows. And so what's on the wire is just the primary key or the unique key. So I need either primary key or unique key. Otherwise, the only thing I can do is really a row count compare. But if there's a primary key or a unique key, there's the unique key and the hash for each one of the rows, and then it does a streaming compare. So in terms of resource utilization locally, it's pretty light. So anyway, I just thought I'd give you a quick demo in terms of what it looks like. So if you can switch to my screen, great. So this is running against a local SQL Server database and a managed instance. So what I have is basically I have a very simple. It's part of. I've stolen some tables from AdventureWorks, and I've added this. There's another table in here that's called AA test table. AA was just so that it's at the top of the list. But basically, what this does is it actually it has a column of every data type that I support in SQL. If you actually look at the output here, you can see in red, you can see that there's hash mismatches in this table. And then if you look at a little further down, because it's multi-threaded, the little number here, I don't know if you can see it, hopefully, the little number in the brackets is actually the thread number. So they're interleaved. So we see there's 12 mismatches within the AA test table, and then all the rest of the tables are green, so they're all good. So we were doing, in that compare, we were doing about 18,000 rows per second. So this was going to MI versus obviously the local database is running on my local machine. So now if we look at what is created here, so the log looks like this. So this is the where we actually see the mismatches. And again, this is a very contrived example to prove that I'm catching differences in the different column types. So you can see there's one bit different in this long binary. And anyway, you look through the rest of it. For debugging and for to help you understand what I'm doing, I actually put out the select statements on the source and on the target. In this case, they're both SQL, so the two commands are very similar. But I have another example that I'm actually running against a DB2 database, a local VM running DB2. And here again, I have that test table just to test against DB2. And again, the output's very similar. And then what I see is in the log, I actually see the command that I issued to the source, which is DB2. So it'll be formatted a bit differently. So yeah, and then the last slide just had some pointers to some resources to actually get the tool. The tool's on download.microsoft.com. And within the tool, the only thing that's missing is if you're going against a DB2 or an Oracle or a Teradata or such, those drivers are actually licensed, so we're not allowed to include them in the zip. So, but in the user guide, it explains how to actually get them and how to update the binaries and whatever else. So, in terms of feedback, there's an email there, and then basically the IP that we create within the team, we try to share back with the community through the migration asset sections of the Azure database migration guides. So there's also a link there. So
awesome, cool, Mitch. That was really cool. I've actually never seen this before, but I can definitely see how it's going to be very valuable for a lot of customers. And what I like about it is it was kind of developed out of the need that a customer had, and then you were like, hey, this is positive experience for this customer. Let's kind of scale it out to everyone. So it's very much customer driven, which is awesome. And so thanks, Mitch, so much for joining us.
All right, thanks.
Sure. Cool. Onward and forward. Great show so far. Some cool demos, some cool announcements and things to go try out. Reminder, head to aka.ms/news-update to see all of the links. So if you want the database compare utility, you can head over there. So next up, what we have is we're just continuing on with our awesome guests. And I'm going to bring back on our dear friend from the Azure Data Factory team, Wee-Hyung. Wee-Hyung, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, and thank you, Anna. It's always a pleasure to be on the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And you're starting to become kind of a regular, which I think makes sense, honestly, because Azure Data and Azure SQL plus Azure Data Factory often go hand in hand.
Thank you, Anna.
Awesome. So today, I believe you're going to tell us about some things that are new. So I'm just going to go ahead and pass it to you.
Sounds good. So today, we are really excited to share the newly designed Azure Data Factory homepage. And I think, first of all, thank you to the design, engineering, and PM team for working together really hard over the past few months to deliver not just a modern, but an accessible experience. Now, one of the things that we'll do as we switch to the demo, you'll see that the design of the newly designed homepage is now more fluid. And in fact, what you'll see here is immediately once you open the Azure Data Factory Studio, you will get to this new homepage that is not just modern, but it's also more fluid with better contrast. As you view this, not just on the browser, if you view it on your mobile phone, you'll be able to experience it being the smooth reflow capabilities for all the controls. But at the same time, one of the things that is always top of our mind is developer velocity. And now, as an ETL developer working in the Azure Data Factory Studio, one of the things that you want access to is, some of the recent resources that you have recently worked with, because you want to get into it and immediately work on the data pipelines or the data flows. And so as you scroll down the homepage, one of the things you'll see is the recent resources. But at the same time, we'll also show you some of the latest and greatest showcase of things that we've just shipped, but also integration with many of the other products like Azure Purview. And of course, you get access to tutorials, videos, community content, and much more, right? And one of the things I just want to call out is we could not have done this change or the redesign of the Azure Data Factory homepage without the community support. And so I just want kudos to all the community, whether it's MVPs, folks that's passionate about data, for all the feedback over the past many months that led us to redesign this homepage. And since we launched this on Monday, the feedback has been streaming in. Many of them has been positive, and some of them, of course, gave really good feedback on how we could add even more things, right, to make you more productive. Now, to end off, I just want to show you one more thing is, if you're going to create a pipeline, or if you're going to create a data flow, or if you just want a Power Query experience in Data Factory, all you need is clicking New, and if you click on a pipeline, this immediately brings you to the pipeline design page, which is just awesome, right? And so if you're new to Azure Data Factory, you no longer have to look for, where should I get started in creating a pipeline? It is all there.
Wow, that is really cool. Love the new update.
That's right. And so if we switch back to the slides, I think besides this update that came over the past month or so, the team has also worked hard on delivering several other features. One of them, of course, is support for always encrypted if you're connecting to Azure SQL, SQL MI, or SQL Server. And one of the things that's top of mind that we get asked a lot during a lot of customer conversation as well as product roundtables is, well, I want to be able to send an email when a pipeline fails or when pipeline is successfully run. And instead of giving you emails, they say, wow, how nice if we bring Azure Data Factory and Microsoft Teams together. And so today, if your pipeline fails, you can actually create a Teams channel, and it's going to send you a notification, and you can configure what is the format, how does it look like by just editing the JSON payload, which is awesome. And so now you get all your notification about Data Factory and the pulse of all your pipelines and data flows just there in Microsoft Teams. And I think the last piece, which is really exciting, is Power Query activity. We continue to make significant progress in making sure that not only can you do complex field mapping to some of the Power Query columns, if you will, and we continue to push on that front to make sure that the visual data wrangling experience is the best experience for all. And so we can see what you can build with data integration on Azure. So thank you, Anna.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much, Wee-Hyung. It's exciting to see all these updates coming in, and also to see like how, maybe the Azure SQL team invests in something like Always Encrypted and you guys follow, so that we continue to actually be always encrypted no matter what we're doing in Azure SQL or in Azure Data Factory. So that's pretty cool. And of course, Teams integrations is cool. So I'm happy to see that too. But thanks so much for joining us, Wee-Hyung. For our viewers, we will put a link to all this in the blog.
Thank you, Anna, for having us on the show. Thank you.
Of course. All right, cool. So great show so far, and still so much more to come. So I hope you guys are ready to stick around. The next thing I wanted to do is just touch on a few blogs. So if you're not familiar with this segment, basically I go and look at all of the gazillion blogs that get posted every month across different websites, kind of bring them together and say, hey, these are the ones I think as a data professional or a SQL professional, you might be the most interested in. So first I start with the Azure blog. This is usually reserved for, like big executive announcements. So to talk about a few of them, one I found interesting was this new data center that is in Arizona. And this is interesting because it's a sustainable data center. So you'll have to read about what exactly that means. But if you see a new region in the Azure portal, it's called West US 3, and you'll know it's that sustainable Arizona region. So I just thought that was kind of a fun fact. The other two of the blogs here are about that Azure Arc announcement. The first one by Rohan Kumar and the second one by Guillermo. So again, just another reminder that this Azure Arc announcement is a big deal for Microsoft. So definitely want to read more about it, and you can actually check out the Azure Hybrid and Multi-Cloud Digital event on demand if you missed it live. Also, if you missed last week's Data Exposed live session, we did a really fun episode with Buck, Woody, Dhananjay, and Lior from different teams around Azure SQL as well as the Jumpstart team. And they showed us all about Azure Arc and the different data services, how to get started, and then how the Jumpstart team is making it really easy for you to just kind of like do a few clicks and have an environment to play with all this new cool stuff that you want to learn all about. So that's a really cool one. The other thing I wanted to mention, this is kind of tangential, but then as I was reading it, I thought this is actually very similar for what goes on in an Azure data modernization. Let me just check something real fast. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay. And that is the joy of streaming live. Sometimes stuff goes wrong. So apologies, I just lost connectivity for a second. I've been having Ethernet issues today, but bear with me. I appreciate y'all's patience. So what I'm going to do is just kind of reshare my screen. If you just give me one moment. Again, I do apologize for the inconvenience here. But what I was talking about before my internet so rudely kicked me off of the Wi-Fi is this third blog here, which is about scaling with retail applications using the Cloud Application Framework. So hopefully you guys have heard of the Cloud Adoption Framework. So I don't want to go over that too much. But what I wanted to mention is they talk about kind of 3 phases when it comes to kind of innovation and digital transformation. The first is like a siloed retail. So this is where you don't have a lot of cloud innovation or cloud adoption, so you don't necessarily have the right updates or intelligence that you could add to your applications. That's kind of like the base level of where they see a lot of retail companies today. Then there's a connected retail, and this is where you're starting to migrate some workloads to the cloud and also take advantage of some of the innovation and, kind of agility you could move with in the cloud. And then finally, which I really like, is the analytics-driven retail. And this is basically like you've taken steps to align to a common data model, you're preparing for future growth, and you're actually unlocking some pretty advanced analytics to, have a better retail story. And I also just want to thank some of you on the stream that understand the Wi-Fi issues. We've all been there, and we just do what we can. All right, so that's some of the Azure blogs. I also wanted to take some time to talk about the latest Data Exposed episodes that we came out with this month. Lots of interesting things to check out. CDC went public preview earlier, maybe a month or two ago. So you might want to check out and learn more about CDC and Azure SQL and how it's different from SQL Server and how it's really similar to what you may know in SQL Server. Jason Anderson came on to talk about Azure SQL Database Ledger. So this was kind of like a short form video if you want the highlight reel on what Azure SQL Database Ledger is. But if you want to go deeper, if you go over to our live on-demand videos on our Azure SQL YouTube page, you can check out the Azure SQL Security Series, the data protection episode, which we did most recently, featured like a 45-minute dive into what Azure SQL Database Ledger is. You'll hear me talk more about this later in the episode because I just think the tech is so cool, and bringing blockchain to SQL without you having to really learn blockchain is just really impressive, and I'm like really proud of our team for doing that. We also continued our Migrating to SQL series, so you want to check that out. And we had a great MVP edition episode with Monica Raithbun, who talked about performance tuning for your readable secondary. So that's, has some gotchas and things you want to check out and learn more. Another thing, I've already mentioned the deep dive that Buck, Dahananjay, and Lior did on Azure Arc, so check that out, as well as Buck and I did our most recent ethics and AI episode of Something Old, Something New. This was a really fascinating conversation, a really hard conversation, but I think it's one that's worth looking more into, especially as your organizations move towards using more analytics and more intelligence in your applications. The last thing I wanted to talk about before our next special guest is what's going on in the SQL Server tech community and blog. Two things I wanted to call out here. One, you might have seen this already, but we did release an update that the beta program for SQL Server on Windows containers has been suspended. If this is something that you've been working on or looking at, I definitely recommend checking out the blog to read more about what this suspension entails. Finally, you all know that I like to do some data science work. So we had this recent blog from James Roland Jones on our team about the future of R in Azure SQL and SQL Server. Now, if you go back in time, you remember that between 2016 and 2017, we introduced machine learning services for R and then Python, which basically allows you to do in-database machine learning. So not moving any data out of the database and doing machine learning. So that's been a really powerful thing and something a lot of our customers are taking advantage of. But basically what we're doing is there was an acquisition that we made before all this happened. It was called Revolution Analytics, a very cool team. Actually, my previous team to here was working with some of the Revolution Analytics folks. But basically, they created some of these packages called RevoScale packages, and they allowed you to, with very high performance and scale, do in-database machine learning. So one of the big announcements that I saw out of this blog is that we're going to be open sourcing those packages, which is really great. And I really think it's going to help us do more in-database machine learning because those packages are going to be freely available, easy to access, and easy to learn and work with. So I'm looking forward to that happening. And you can be sure that once they are released on our universe or Azure Universe, I'll do a little demo on Data Exposed Live news updates for y'all. All right. So switching gears a bit, we're doing something new that we haven't done on the show before, and that is bring in someone from another company. But I'm really excited about it because we have this great member of our community, Adrian Hall, who's going to come on and tell us a little bit more about the Hasura GraphQL engine. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Adrian up. Hey, Adrian, how's it going?
Hello, it's going quite well.
Awesome. Well, we are so stoked to have you on the show. Before you tell us about the GraphQL engine, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what Hasura does as a company?
Yeah, so what I do specifically these days is I'm a developer advocate at Hasura. So I get to build all sorts of cool stuff with the Hasura GraphQL API product and then talk about it and show people, and also work with the customers to see what they're building. Lots of good stuff these days with SQL Server, Postgres, and the various things that we have our GraphQL API connect to. So that's basically what I'm doing these days. Yep.
Awesome, cool. And then let's just get right into it. Can you tell us a little bit more about this GraphQL engine and how it might relate or be useful for people using SQL?
So the most useful thing is that you can get GraphQL APIs in a matter of seconds, literal seconds, on your SQL Server database with doing nothing more than just deploying a container or a server or however you want to deploy your Hasura GraphQL API. You deploy it, you point it at the SQL Server database with a standard connection string, like a DSN connection string, and then say, track all these tables, and boom, you have GraphQL APIs for every single table in your database. So,
Cool.
And I'll show a bit of that here in just a second.
Awesome. That sounds cool. Would love to see it.
Awesome. So just for to tempt the live demo magic out there, the demons of the live demo, I just wanted to show that I have destroyed my previous environment, which was out in Azure just minutes ago, and have since redeployed it with Terraform back out to Azure. So I have a completely fresh, clean database and Hasura API and everything. It's deployed migrations, seeds, and all of that using the Hasura CLI tooling. So what we're seeing is live and fresh. It just got deployed. So I just wanted everybody to see that, to know that this is how quick it is. It's literally this quick. So with that, I'll bounce over here. Here's the actual API running in Azure at this very moment. I'm using the container services where I've just deployed out a container, not the elaborate Kubernetes container services, which you could use. This is just the, what is it, ACS. So just a single container, and I have it pointed at various databases out there, a Postgres and a SQL Server database. Now, if I go over to what I deployed and look at our Hasura console, I have it pointed right now at the data tab of our console, and I can look at the Postgres and SQL Server database that I am connected to. And then over here, you can see some of the tables. I like trains, so I have a trains database. This is actually a schema within the database. And then I have a table called railroads. And here's some of the railroads: Amtrak, Sound Transit, Caltrain, etc., that are shown here. Now, this is just the data tab in the Hasura console product where you can browse data, but you can also modify tables and do things like this. You can connect up the relationships, which is very important in GraphQL because you have the whole graph that you can see through and query with. And the good bit, of course, is the GraphQL. So I'm going to click on the API, and this is where you can explore your GraphQL via a standard GraphQL interface. And here you see all the tables and the entities. This can be from a single database, multiple databases. It can be connected to other GraphQL remote schemas out there. You got a lot of options, and it brings it all together basically like a gateway. So you have a gateway GraphQL API to all of your GraphQL entities. And if I just want to run a query just to show you, I can click over here very easily to put together a query, but I'm going to hand code this real quick just for fun. I'll type in query, and then I want to see my railroads, and I'm going to ask for the name of the railroads, and each railroad acts as an operator. Let's see here. There we go, operators. And that has trains that they operate. Yep, train. And then get in here, and I'm going to ask for the name of the trains. So now I'm going to run this query against this database with a recreated migration, some seed data, all of that just put in there minutes ago. And there we go. GraphQL query executed against that. And you can see Amtrak has these Coast Starlight trains, Sound Transit has a bunch of commuter trains, etc. So that connected related data, as you would query it in GraphQL, is right there. Already the relationships and everything are tied together. And that's what Hasura enables you to do in a matter of seconds. So like if you have pre-existing data, or if you just want to build it out via the console or build it out via whatever migration tools you want to use, it doesn't matter how you do it. All you got to do is point this at it, and boom, you have GraphQL APIs.
Wow,
So
that was very cool. Awesome. Cool. Wow. I'm going to have to go check this out myself. I know you shared a link with us, which we put in the blog. Is that the way, like the best way you would say to get started, or do you have any advice for folks just getting started?
Let's see here. The quickest way to get started locally is to actually just do a quick search. This is what I do every time when I do it myself. Just type Hasura Docker Quick Start, and it'll put you right to the docs page and give you the latest, greatest Docker Compose to spin up. And it'll spin up a Postgres and a Hasura API server for you to use. And then you can add whichever databases you want, whether they're Docker containers or local, like SQL Server databases that you're running locally. And you can just point it at those and then start working with it. So that's the quickest way to do it. As far as the repo that I sent you, it's the Terrazura repo, which I named it Terrazura because it's Azure and Terraform. So in the Hasura is also a portmanteau, so I decided to use a portmanteau for my repo. But that has this code that I just deployed, which has the Terraform, the SQL, the migrations, the seeds, all that stuff. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's there. And I also work against it a little bit whenever I do live streams. So I use it for examples, and sometimes I add extra context, like I've added a local deployed environment as well as actual Azure deployment. So if you have an Azure account, you can deploy this whole setup into Azure too.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Adrian. To our viewers, be sure to check the blog to learn more about how to get started with this and how to take advantage of this very fast GraphQL engine. So again, thanks so much for joining us.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. So we continue to have lots of cool stuff to see on the show. Hopefully you all are enjoying the show so far. Let us know. We'd love to see a comment or question from you all, letting us know if this is the sort of things you like to see and hear about. Going forward, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the Azure SQL blogs, just very briefly. So the first two I want to talk about are, the first is the Azure Data Community. Hopefully you all have gotten a chance to see this and find a user group. We spun this up a little while ago, but reposted some things about how to find upcoming events. So you can see kind of in here, you can see podcast blogs, etc. But you can also see some of the upcoming events. So this was a new thing that we added to the website based on the feedback of the new advisory board, which was also one of the blogs. So if you want to learn more about the Azure Data Community Advisory Board and how we're making that work and how we're trying to get feedback from you all, you want to check that one out as well. You can see some of the other blogs here are related to some of the things that you've already seen or heard me talk about already. So I'm not going to talk about those. This SSRS one, I wanted to show a demo. Now, this is a demo I did a while ago, but I wanted to just show you all the demo and walk through it so you can see how the SSRS opportunities arise in once you move to Azure. So I'm just going to play this and I'm going to talk along it. Full disclosure, it is recorded, but it'll still be useful. So what I have here is an Azure SQL managed instance, and you can see it has all the instance scope capabilities you're used to seeing with SQL Server. And now what I'm also doing is I'm using this in an SSRS virtual machine. So that's what I'm actually logging into right now, is the SSRS virtual machine. What you can see is they have these different images available for you when you move to the cloud. So this is going to make it easier for you to basically say, okay, I want to lift and shift to the cloud, and I either want just SQL Server reporting services, or I also want the SQL Server itself. And you can see I'm in that SSRS VM now. And then if I switch over to the actual report server, you can see I have some reports that are reporting on the performance. And I can also see that I'm storing those databases in Azure SQL Managed Instance. So you see the report server and report server TempDB. I'm restoring my SSRS databases in Managed Instance, which is going to help me in that piecemeal kind of migration. Now, one of the things I'm showing here, which I'm not going to spend a ton of time on right now, is just the report itself. So this is a paginated report, and you can see that the variance is like very high. So you might think that maybe my quota and variance, like something's going on here. And if you even take a look at another report, what you're going to see is that I don't even have a quota for most of the months that people are doing their sales thing. So what I did in this demo is I put on my data scientist hat, and I went over to Azure Data Studio and said, hey, I wonder if I could take a look at this and do some data science and kind of make a better prediction for what the quota should actually be on a month-over-month basis, so we can make more accurate predictions and more accurate quotas for our sales folks. So if I hop over to Azure Data Studio, what you're going to see is this machine learning extension. Now, this is a relatively new extension, which is just making it a lot easier to get started. You can manage your packages, you can import models, you can create a notebook. For me, I just went ahead and created a notebook and I started doing some data science. In this demo, I was also showing off how we've improved the Markdown experience. So if you don't like Markdown, you can take screenshots, you can edit text very easily, and we're gonna convert it all to Markdown for you so you don't have to learn it unless you want to. So that's what I was showing there. Kind of cool if you haven't seen it before, especially if you don't use Azure Data Studio. I highly recommend it. Okay, so back to this data science problem. Basically, what I was doing is starting to understand, okay, so we are missing a lot of quota examples. And if you look at the sales versus the quota, there doesn't seem to be a big pattern. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do some data science modeling. Again, I'm not going to go through all of this, but basically we're using that SQL machine learning services that I mentioned briefly earlier in Python this time to basically use Python to train a model, and then we're going to basically store that model in a serialized fashion, which you see there. Then we can use the model to make new predictions and insert them in a table. So I know I'm going really fast, but I just wanted to show you how, now you see the adjusted quota and how we're able to, replace those null values. And if we go back into SSRS, we can kind of add this adjusted quota column instead of the original quota. And you can see now probably we're getting more realistic quotas that we can give to our salespeople and set realistic expectations. So that's one cool thing that came out of this demo. And then the final thing I wanted to show is how I was also taking advantage of Power BI per user premium, and I was very easily able to migrate that paginated report up into Power BI, and now I can start doing more things here and maybe even creating dashboards. So I know a whirlwind of a demo, but just wanted to, again, just show you all that blog that talks about how to move SSRS to Azure is very useful and kind of gives you a great way to take that phased migration approach you've heard me talk about so many times to Azure. All right, so finally, before our next segment, I wanted to talk about some of the Azure Database Support blog topics that came up. These are really interesting. The team always does a great job over in support to kind of surface up these learnings to us. A few things here you'll want to look into yourself. One of the interesting ones, I mean, all of these are very interesting, but one of the interesting ones that I got to play with was this automated backpack exportation. So basically, they have code in here to create a PowerShell runbook. And the runbook, so I basically copied and pasted all this, set in my Azure SQL database, and it's basically going to, on a schedule, go and run the PowerShell commands to export this Azure SQL database as a backpack file and store it in a container. So if I have some processes or requirements that require me to do that, I can do that, and I can even set a retention period, and after that retention period, it will delete it. This was so easy to set up. You can see I set it up just yesterday afternoon, and I set it to do a backup every hour just so we could have a lot of things to look at, but definitely not required to do it every hour. But this was just a really cool blog, and he steps through how to do that. The other thing I found really interesting was this synonyms thing. There's so much to learn in SQL Server and Azure SQL, and as someone who's only been doing this for a few years, I'm always learning stuff. So this most recent thing I learned is that you could use synonyms in Azure SQL Managed Instance to make it so that you can easily reference your linked servers table. So very short blog, very simple, but a tip and trick that I didn't know. So I thought I would go ahead and share it with you. Now, with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Cheryl and Mark to talk about SQL in a minute. So I will bring you all up, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, welcome again to another segment of SQL in a Minute. We're going to chat about the work that we do here on the SQL team. I'm excited especially to share this topic today because it's about migrations, and that's an area that I focus on here on the team. But my special treat today is that I am joined by one of my favorites, a senior content developer here on the SQL Docs team, Mark. Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Cheryl. Thank you.
You know, when I think about migrations, I can't help but think about the technology that's involved in moving forward into that space. The time, the effort, the energy that it takes, the thoughtfulness that we need to go through to make sure that we make the right choice for the migrations. One of the main features that we have that we've developed over time is the SQL or the migrations hub page. And that hub page covers many different areas. Mark, you were going to share that screen. Let's get started and take a look at that. There's so many gems on this page, and I really want to just get into this. Can you tell me something about it?
Of course. Well, Cheryl, you're not wrong. This hub page does have a lot of beautiful things to get people started if they're on one platform and they want to get to another. This hub page contains data migrations from databases to different databases. It contains different migration tools. It also contains open source databases, not necessarily SQL Server or anything Azure SQL related, and other customer stories and other customer feedback that we've gotten that customers want to know how to migrate from one form to another.
Well, you know, I don't bring you on here unless there's something that I want. There was a special thing that you worked on that I was excited to hear about in the MySQL space. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to just scroll down a little bit on this page here. As you can see, there's a MySQL section specifically. So what we recently did was there was a very popular, a very traffic-heavy PDF file in a GitHub repo that was very heavily viewed. However, it was very long, and you know, a lot of people, it got easy to get lost. So what we did was we took that same PDF and we added it to the hub page. If I go and click on this link right here, you can see that we split up the PDF in sections. When you click that link, this first takes you to the introduction, which just explains kind of the whole process. And this takes you from an on-premises MySQL database to an Azure database for MySQL, basically taking your on-premises MySQL and moving it to the Azure cloud. And this just kind of starts you off, gives you a little bit of an introduction. However, we're like, you know what? We did not want the conversion to be just as long as a PDF. So what we did was we kind of took its table of contents, its sections, and we split it up ourselves to make it more readable and easier to follow. So as you can see here, you click from the hub page, you come to the first introduction, but as you sort through on the left side, we have our own table of contents. Ooh. As you sort through each different page, there's a prerequisite section, that kind of references the previous page, which kind of leads you into the next section. And as you continue through each section, at the bottom, there's a next steps, which leads you into the very next section of the guide. So if I go ahead and click assessment, it will lead you into the next part, which falls into the pre-migration section. And then you can just follow through here. If you want to skip around, you can. There's a data migration section, and then there's a post-migration. And then we've added some samples and a summary. So when you're all going through this, you have a chance to kind of play with it yourself.
Wow, there is so much information there. I love how the sections are all broken up, and you have it very intuitively outlined. So as you go through the progression of doing a migration, you basically are just clicking, as you said, through the next step to get to the next section. So this is some great work here. You know, I could literally talk about this all day, but I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. This content looks incredible. I'm sure the community really appreciates the effort of you, as well as your project team, for putting all of this information together. I also want to call out Masha Thomas, who put together our hub page where all of these content pieces reside. So you might be wondering at this point, how do I get to all this great information? Well, take a look at your screen. It's all right there. The SQL documentation, if you click on that AKA link there, look for migration, and then you'll go to the migration guides and you'll be able to see it there. You'll be able to see the guide that we just showed today, as well as all of the other guides. We want to thank you for joining us today on SQL in a Minute. Take care and be safe. Thanks so much, Mark, for coming.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, folks. Awesome. So moving right along, our next guest, or our regular guest, our co-producer, Marisa. I'm going to bring Marisa up. Hey, Marisa, to talk about events.
Hey, Anna. Thanks for having me on again, although you probably don't have a choice here.
Always a pleasure.
So, as always, we have a lot of events where we're speaking at this month. I'm going to go through them, and we also have links to these events in the blog that Anna will put up later. So if you want to register or attend any of them or find out even more details, head to that blog. On July 14th, we have Bob Ward speaking at a Dell webinar, and he'll be talking about Microsoft SQL and how it's evolving, and is your company even keeping up with the pace. On July 28th, we have actually a few speakers speaking at the 8KB SQL Server Internals Conference. Bob Ward will be speaking about SQL weights, latches, and spin locks, and Pam will also be there speaking about Azure Virtual Machine Storage. On July 28th, we have Julie attending or presenting on Notebooks 101 at the Database Professional Virtual Machine group. So make sure to check out the details on that. In addition, we always have our Data Exposed live shows, which is on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Upcoming next week, we have the Azure SQL Virtual Machines. This is their third episode, and that's with Pam and David. The following week, we have a Ask the Expert session, and that's with Bob Ward and Buck Woody, and they'll be speaking about Azure Arc and Azure Managed Instance. If you want to submit questions, we can, definitely answer them on screen or possibly answer them on screen. Send your questions on Twitter to hashtag AskBW for Bob Ward or Buck Woody. If you ask them, they'll argue about that. But anyway, send it to hashtag AskBW. And in the blog, we also have a form if you want to submit your questions to the form. And then on July 28th, we have an Azure Data Studio Power Hour where we have a bunch of people from the tools team joining us. It's going to be rapid fire showing us new tools in that hour. And then, as always, we have our on-demand Data Exposed shows that get released every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific, and you can find those at ak.ms/dataexposedyt like YouTube. And that's it for this month. Thanks, Anna.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Marisa. It's always cool to see what's coming up on Data Exposed Live. Really interested to see how the Ask BW goes, and the Power Hour as well. I think that'll be a fun one. So fun month coming, and thanks so much for keeping us on track. Great. So we have so much going on, but there's just two more things I want to share with you all before we close out the show for the day. The first is the monthly Microsoft Learn module. Today, I'm recommending you check out Architect Modern Applications using Azure SQL Database. This is a really cool module. I'm not biased at all, but this is a cool module because you can get hands-on. You can configure your development environment with Visual Studio Code. You can deploy and configure Azure SQL Database using scripts. And you can also automate your updates to your Azure SQL Database using a DAC pack and using Azure SQL Actions. So that's also a cool one to check out. So this is the link where you can find that. I also put a link to it in the blog. Finally, I have my pick of the month. Now you're probably tired and sick of hearing me talk about how cool I think Azure SQL Database Ledger is, but I think it's really cool. If you haven't gotten the chance to learn about it, go watch the short episode on our YouTube channel or watch the deep dive episode. Or if you're feeling really nerdy, there's a white paper that explains how we did what we did and how we're making it super easy for you all to take advantage of those capabilities. So again, I think this is kind of moving towards the future, and you'll continue to see our team take the latest tech investments like blockchain and try to bring them into Azure SQL in ways that it makes sense. Again, just taking a look at some of the questions, we're looking for a link in the chat. It's a very simple link. Hopefully you can remember it's aka.ms/news update. So definitely go check out that link to get all of the references for all the great stuff you saw today. We also host this video on our YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to our channel, you can go back and rewatch any pieces that you want to rewatch. And then you can also get notifications for the next time that we stream. As we close out, I just want to thank you all for joining us. We are streaming every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we release new episodes on Thursdays at 9 a.m. Pacific, so something to look forward to tomorrow. But again, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.